joining us for the 2022 Divergent Award Lecture Series as part of the Initiative for Literacy in a Digital Age Research. Today, we're joined by several of the 2022 Divergent Award honorees who are coming together to share in conversation around a topic important to the work we do as educators, scholars, and practitioners. The Initiative for Literacy in a Digital Age is supported by the Kim and Chuck Watson Endowed Chair in Education at Oklahoma State University. I am your facilitator today. I'm Jennifer Dale. I am a professor of English education at Kennesaw State University, and I'm going to let my magnificent colleagues who are here with me introduce themselves to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I'm Cheryl McLean. I'm an associate prof at the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University. My area of interest generally English education, literacy education, and focused on teacher ed.
Hi, I'm Renee Hobbs. I'm the professor of communication studies with a joint appointment in education at the University of Rhode Island. I'm the co-director of the graduate certificate in digital literacy. And for the last 20 years, I've been the director of the Media Education Lab. Our mission is to advance digital and media literacy education through scholarship and community service.
Thanks, Renee.
I'm Cassie Brownell, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto in the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, or OISE, as it's more commonly known. And most of my work involves equity in early childhood and elementary literacies, as well as kind of critical and digital literacies across the board, including teacher education. And I'm excited to join all of you today.
Thanks, Cassie. It is exciting to be in the same space with people whose work I know and get to hear about it firsthand from you. So although this conversation was pre-recorded, we invite your participation in the chat feature or comment section of the social media or website channel you are accessing to view this conversation. In today's Divergent conversation, we're exploring curiosity, inquiry, and following down the rabbit hole in digital spaces. There's quite a bit to unpack here. So let's start with the ways that digital spaces support curiosities and more formally, inquiry. So I'm going to turn it over to my friends and learn with you.
So thanks, Jennifer. I'll start because one of the things that I appreciate is just a title, the whole idea of curiosity and inquiry and falling down the rabbit hole. It as you said, it's a lot to unpack. And when I think of digital spaces, one of the things that I'm working through is this concept that we, and even in my work, tend to separate digital from everyday life. And I'm beginning to see the need to see them as integrated, particularly with the young people that I work with, that maybe for me, for others, for some of us, the digital is something that's additional, but for many of these young people, it's a way of life. It's their life. It's an innate character of their lived experience. And so when I think of in inquiry as a researcher, that's something that I want to explore some more, right? What does it mean to live as, the digital as a lived practice?
Yeah, I really love that idea. Of course, I hope someday we won't even have to use the word digital before the word literacy, because we'll just fully understand that what we're talking about is texts that we use to share meaning in whatever symbol system or form they take. But I have to comment on the interesting way in which the terms curiosity and falling down the rabbit hole are linked. I just wrote a book on propaganda education. I discovered, I think as many of you already know, that persuasive genres are often overlooked in English language arts education as we focus on expository and narrative texts. And We really are afraid. We are afraid, as David Fleming says, of persuasive text. We don't teach about advertising. We don't teach about propaganda. We are nervous. We somehow think they're inferior to other forms of text. And I have been pushing back against that, but that puts me in a position where I've done a lot of talking to teachers who try to teach about conspiracy theories. Of course, the intellectual curiosity that is erupted in a classroom when high school students are empowered to pick a conspiracy theory and figure it out. It's an opportunity to activate all kinds of information literacy questions, to talk about issues that are current in the popular culture, that are controversial in the popular culture, but it scares teachers to death. And this last year, you and I all know how fearful teachers have become about addressing relevant topics that are ongoing in the culture in relation to intellectual curiosity. And at the same time, I feel like the genuine power of being a lifelong learner, an independent learner, a collaborative learner, is really only fully realized when students get a chance to formulate a question, explore it, get into the messiness of it, and then find a way to represent their knowledge by creating some form of media to share with their peers, their family, and the larger world.
I feel like you set me up really well for what I wanted to talk about. So thank you, Renee. I wanted to share a bit about one of the groups that I'm having the chance to work with in the last year, which is a kid radio station and program based out of New Orleans. And so Be Loud Studios, everyone should check them out online. They're fantastic. They have an Instagram, and they also have SoundCloud, where they play the Be Loud Radio Hour after it's run live on WHIV in New Orleans. And so together, like, this is a space where young children ranging in age from, say, like intermediate elementary grades up through about 8th grade come together and have the chance once a week to be recording their own scripts, sometimes on prompts that are provided on everything from, like, give us your family recipe, which is part of a larger kind of initiative in the city, to talking about really critical issues that are important to them. And as kids in upper elementary and middle grades, those are things like using appropriate pronouns for people, or the Black Lives Matter movement, or talking about the need to wear masks or to be vaccinated related to COVID. And so for me, that's been a really interesting space to kind of explore and be curious alongside of young people and really see the ways that they are making use of their knowledge of the world through media in a way that connects to their community. And then in addition to that, in writing their own scripts, they also have the opportunity to meet a lot of adults in the community and put them on the hot seat. And they have the chance to ask them questions and be curious about how it is that they landed in the positions that they did, whether it's the chief of the Mardi Gras Indians or different folks, like even the person who runs the radio station where this is actually played every Saturday morning. And so they have the chance to ask questions and explore and get to know their community and adults in a different way than I think we often provide young people the opportunity to do. And so when I think about being curious and using digital to inquire and to really share in the ways that you were talking about, Renee, those are the first people that I often am thinking of these days, are these young DJs in New Orleans.
Well, I want to draw on what Renee said and what Cassie, when I think of, when you think of your students, those young people at the DJ, Renee brought up some important points that when we think of curiosity, there's this freedom, but with it, as Renee pointed out, there's controversy, right? There's some level of censorship. How does that impact the level of curiosity, the extent to which these young people can explore, given that they know they're still doing so within the traditional confines of the adults in the room determining what is said, what gets out there, how it is said. So what are your thoughts, the two of you, on this?
Yeah, there's some really great scholarship that's been emerging for about the last 10 years or so that looks at the power relationships between adults and young people in the youth media, in the context of youth media production activities in and out of school. And one insight from that literature that really helps teachers like get over it is to honor the fact that creativity always comes with constraint.
Okay.
Right? In fact, most creative artists and design professionals and filmmakers and creative people will say, I can't do anything if I have a completely free playing field. I need a constraint. I'm only going to use pencil, or I'm only going to use black and white photography, or I'm only going to use, I'm only going to use Instagram. There has to be a constraint in order for creativity to flourish. So in a way, we have to acknowledge the power hierarchies are absolutely present. They manifest themselves in really complicated ways. One recent study talked a little bit about something they called youthful restraint. Kids know where the boundaries are, by and large. They've learned it from being in school. Right. And so being sensitive to that shouldn't freak teachers out or think they have to use a whole new paradigm, but to appreciate that the constraints you set actually can accelerate creativity because constraints are part of the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to share kind of anecdotally again, in response to your question, Cheryl, thinking with so these young people, these DJs have been having the opportunity to have their voices live on the air in a weekly segment. So it really is radio more than it is podcast, right? It's a kind of ephemeral sort of thing that happens just once a week, despite that it lives online later. And so for these young people, they had the opportunity to have a hot seat with this owner of the radio station, which is a radio station that was launched on World AIDS Day many years ago, is like very for justice sort of issues in different ways and foregrounding those across the community, and like talks about wanting to have the voices on the radio to be representative of the community of New Orleans. And that includes these young people. And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting as the young people have had the chance to sort of explore the website for WHIV, they're familiar with the programming because their own show is on it. And they ask everything from, do you listen to the Be Loud Radio Hour, knowing that just because he owns it doesn't mean he and like lets them be on it, might not be listening. But they also asked a question about like, what do you do when people troll you? Like what happens if people are unhappy with what it is that you're sharing on your radio station? And, the owner like responded by talking about how they share like those emails or those letters on their website. And they want to like show the world like who these people are that are like speaking out against them. And they held it up like as a point of pride. And I think that's an interesting example in that it sort of touches on like these larger ideas around propaganda, right? And the ways that children are always paying attention in the world and aware and able to resist in some ways, as you talked about, Renee, but so too are they cognizant of how they can learn from others about how to push back and stand their ground on issues that they do think are really important and that they want people to hear them talk about.
Oh, thanks. I really love that because Renee, you said something that struck me, that creativity comes with constraints, right? And that constraints almost facilitate creativity. And oftentimes when I think of constraints, I think that sometimes it might hinder creativity. So it's good to get that perspective. And even with Cassie, to hear that these students are, asking these questions and that we get multiple voices. But I also think multiple voices sometimes it's numbers, but I like the idea of multiple perspectives as well. So we have that, diversity. And this idea of the rabbit hole for me is we often think, that these young people are using the digital and sometimes they can get lost and they don't know what they're doing. But I am playing around with this idea, when I look at some young people that I'm doing research with in upper elementary, for them, the digital allows them to find themselves, right? Find themselves in new spaces, often by a happy accident, find themselves, I see it as finding their voice, right? So that they feel knowledgeable enough, confident enough to express their identities, to express viewpoints, and to learn something new, to find something new.
This is a really important point, Cheryl, and I'm really glad you've introduced the topic of identity into our dialogue here. My job is to teach practicing teachers, not pre-service teachers, but teachers who are already out there in the field, how to implement digital and media literacy into their curricula. And one of the things I've discovered over the years is that short, frequent deadlines, I can't give them too much rope. I can't let them fall down the rabbit hole.
Okay.
I have to make a small project very doable in a short period of time that builds their confidence as digital authors, because a lot of educators themselves don't really think about themselves as digital authors. How many times have you done a professional development, asked teachers to Google their name, and they proudly say, I don't exist online. And I'm like, and why are you proud of that? Given what we talked about at the beginning about the collision of real world and the digital world.
Yes.
Like why are you not participating in contemporary culture?
Especially when you're teaching young people.
Especially when you're preparing students to be citizens and workers in the 21st century. Yeah. So small assignments with tight constraints that force people to get something done and out there without having to take too much time, without having to fall down the rabbit hole, builds their confidence. Because once people have confidence, then they start thinking, that opens the door to identity. They start going, oh, well, maybe I could make a podcast. Oh, maybe I could make an infographic. Oh, maybe I could make a YouTube video. But it takes time and success for that confidence to develop. And I think that's just as true for children and middle school kids and high school kids as much as it is for practicing teachers.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very true. We've been fully online here at Oise since the pandemic started. And so I was already someone who was asking my students to make videos and those sorts of things when we were having, face-to-face methods courses. But I think in the time of the pandemic, it's been able to my rationale for why I'm asking them to do it feels a little more pressing, in that I'm sure as we're recording this, many teachers are currently teaching fully online at the moment in pre-K through 12
and have
through university and have been. And so I think that one of the things that I often try to push in the courses that I teach too is helping teachers to see that when we say, oh, I want you to make a recording, or I want you to make a video, or even, a Google slide for a kiddo that they have in class, they also have to be able to do that. They have to know the mechanics of how those sorts of things work, because they have to be able to help them to troubleshoot, or they have to be able to, speak at a meta level about some of the creation and production tools and the specific skills that go alongside of that. And so I think that's really important. And it's something that isn't comfortable for a lot of teachers, especially if we're in service and we've been doing it for a long time. It's hard to think differently about how we approach that work. And I think even for young teachers, sometimes are very fluent on things like TikTok and Instagram, but knowing how to engage in the digital in different ways is not always as easy as a transferable skill as an educator as it might be for us personally. And so I think that's an interesting thing. I'd be interested to know more about your own experiences with that and in your classes that you've taught as well.
Well, the whole idea of transferring the knowledge. So we might be able to do it on a personal level, but can we teach that? Are we aware of the different literacies that are involved, and what's required if you are, that we learn visually and the auditory, and so it takes some time. I think oftentimes, and in my work with pre-service as well as in-service teachers, to get us to shift from seeing these digital platforms as add-ons, right? And they're often that, okay, so it's I'm teaching plus I'm doing the visual or the digital. And so to help us see that I'm teaching. And that's what it is. And the digital is just yet another tool, but and it requires additional skills, but not that we keep it separate.
Yeah, that is a great point. That is a great point. I actually think competence is overrated. I think if we're talking about curiosity and inquiry, then the teacher who models the stance of the co-learner I've seen just amazing results. And I want to talk about a middle school. I did some observations with a middle school librarian, right? And students had the genius hour kind of project where they could take on a research question of their choice, investigate it as they want, but they had to present something in a multimedia format. One kid says, I want to make mine animation. Well, this librarian didn't know how to use Powtoon or Animoto or any of the animation, but she was like, well, let's learn together.
Yeah.
And I feel there's something very liberating to learners who encounter a teacher's identity as a co-learner. It levels the authority relationship, but in a really beneficial way, because kids then get a feeling of reward for being able to teach the teacher something.
Yeah.
And teachers model this idea that you don't have to have everything all figured out. You can go in and make mistakes and learn through your errors. And that's partly why I emphasize with my own students the idea of fail fast.
Oh.
Right? I say you're going to learn more through failure than through success. So fail as fast as you can. And stop being so concerned. And it's the test culture. It's the high stake test culture.
Yeah.
It has interfered with that as part of the natural part of curiosity. Failure and curiosity are linked, but it's this test culture, this testing culture that's made people afraid to fail. So we have to get over it ourselves as we help students unleash their creativity.
Yeah, the whole idea of being afraid to fail, the reality of time constraints. Right, because we are in a test culture, and my in-service teachers will say, yes, but time, and I'm willing to do all these things, but, and there's always the but, because there's time, the time constraints. Even for the conversation here, we are aware that at some point we'll get the signal that it's time. Cassie, your thoughts?
Yes, no, I was just thinking, that's very true. I think the time is an interesting element of it. And I wanted to also reflect a little bit about the question of curiosity and inquiry and falling down a rabbit hole and thinking about it, not just in terms of classroom everyday educators or the various students or those students who are hoping to become teachers, but also as researchers. And so again, thinking about the availability of the digital in various forms within classrooms. And so for myself, thinking a lot about how in my dissertation, I was able to work with a teacher who was willing to give some time and some space and be a learner alongside of me with some of the things that we were letting third graders engage in, including just kind of letting them have access to tablets and kind of the old school digital cameras And I think one of the things to kind of go back to like this idea of identity that you initially brought up, Cheryl, was really taken by all of like the videos I found much later that were sort of buried deep in some of the images that students had taken of their work, or in between skits that they had recorded, where they would use these tools to speak directly to me and talk me through their maybe more analog materials that they've created with. They would use the digital then to communicate to me about it. Sometimes saying things like, one young girl said something like, "Do you see me working down here? Can you see me?" to try to like insert herself in that way, where another young girl made a series of digital recordings on a tablet of her constructing like a Lego wall between the US border with Mexico, which was a topic we were talking about at the time. But these were things that I think like I fell down a deep rabbit hole of finding these like different recordings that students were making when they just had this access, and the ways that they used that to really elevate their voice and call attention to what they wanted to in the work in a way that was different than maybe what the teacher and I were framing as the task, or what it was that maybe they knew we were already looking for to really make it what they wanted in some ways. And so I wanted to make those couple of connections. But
Yeah.
Cheryl, you look like you have something to say with that.
No. I love that connection that you're making, because often as researchers or even as teachers, we go in knowing what we want. We say that I'm open to anything and you can be as creative as you like, but students know, and sometimes as teachers, we know what we're looking for. And so to be open to seeing the agency in these young people that you just described, that they are using the tools in a purposeful and deliberate way. And do we always recognize this? Right? And sometimes it could be lost, but I see it as agency. I see it as them, that's their voice, that they have something to say. And as a researcher, I have to step back and try to discern, what are they saying? Step back and stop listening to my focus and listen with intent to what they're saying. Unmute.
And as I listen to your story, Cassie, I also think about how for kids who are growing up where their first media or their earliest media is social media.
Yeah.
And this idea that, so I come from a world of texts and textuality where, this work, is a piece of mass media.
Yeah, we always have something.
It's one voice speaking to many,
yeah.
Right? And so I naturally privilege audiences and an individual voice speaking to an audience, because I grew up in the era of mass communication, but these kids are growing up in the area where interpersonal communication is now mediatized.
Yes.
And so for them, those little things they were sharing or that were out there in the world, those were very natural in the context of one-to-one dialogue through digital media, but they're not always familiar to us who are working from a different paradigm that's rooted in mass media context. And actually, I think to be successful, kids need to be able to exercise both of those talents. I worry about kids who can only participate in niche communities and can't speak to broader audiences. That's not helping them prepare for careers and citizenship, right? But I do think that that's a really important sphere of influence for children and young people. So both are necessary, I think.
And Renee, I would add that I'd apply that same measure to teachers, whether it's in service, whether it's pre-service, and researchers as well.
Yeah, I think I was just going to add, I know we're coming close to our time, but I just wanted we're in the midst of, the day that we're recording this, the Daily just like put out a really great episode around the Chicago teachers and like their experiences at this time and the different sorts of back and forths that they've had with the mayor about should they remain open or not. And I think one of the things that I think is also really interesting is the way that we kind of have like edu celebrities, both at the university level, but also across TikTok and Instagram. If it's, you know, pre-K teachers who relay funny stories from the lunchroom to these Chicago teachers who are like, I'm posting every day the updates of what this is like, because I want people to really hear us in a way that I don't think that the media is hearing us, and that I don't feel like the city is hearing us. And I think that that's like a really important way that the digital has been used and taken up by teachers to act as advocates and activists, both for themselves as well as the communities that they're a part of.
And to share their voices and their perspectives, right? And with this, they're able to reach a broader audience. And have, as Renee pointed out, that interaction, you know, with the mass audience.
Yeah. You know, 10 years ago or 12 years ago now, when I wrote the plan of action for digital and media literacy, I added, in addition to accessing, analyzing, and creating media, people needed to reflect and take action. And Cassie, your story is the perfect articulation of what does it mean to take action? Is to use the power of communication and information to make a difference in the world. That's a literacy competency, and we have to model that as educators and give students opportunities to practice it for themselves.
Definitely.
I think that point of advocacy and taking action is such a great way to sort of bring this full circle, because like you, Renee, I work with practicing teachers. So it's always, so what? So what does this mean to us in our daily practice and in the work we're doing in classrooms with students? So that's just such a good way to wrap it up, in my opinion. And I just enjoyed listening to all the thinking going on in this space, and I'm sure our audience did as well. Thank you, ladies.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun. Bye now.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.